Hi, I'm your host, Laura Nichols, and this is a note from your coach from me, Queen of the Pivot, to you, badass human. This show is designed as a quick dose of unfiltered motivation to empower you to create the life you want to be living, one of authenticity and alignment. It investigates the power of the pivot and helps create understanding of the human journey, all while sharing tales of pivots from my sometimes ridiculous human experience, as well as my 20 years of experience in working with other humans on growth and change. If you are interested in leveling up your life, stay tuned. A note from your coach starts now. Hello, everybody. I am Laura Nichols, and you are listening to Notes from Your Coach on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay with me for the next hour and let me help you ignite your life with some unfiltered motivation. Each first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific and 3 p.m. Eastern Standard, I will be discussing some small but potent nuggets of truth from my book, Notes from Your Coach, to help you create the life you want to be living. So let's get into it today. Thank you for everyone who has reached out and are listening, and for all of my friends who have agreed to be guests thus far. Today I'm rocking it alone. But this week's quote that we're going to be talking about has a lot to do with feelings. And the quote that I chose this week is, do you want to live an authentic life? Start with feeling every feeling. And when I wrote that quote, I think what I was realizing is that, authenticity is a word that gets thrown around so much. And we want to live an authentic life. And we want to show up authentically. And we want to be vulnerable. And all of that is well and good. But if we're not being authentic with ourselves and showing up authentically by feeling all the feelings and being aware of what our body is telling us based on the thoughts that create the feelings, then we can't really show up in a magnified depth with anybody else. So it's not just about, rocking the purple hair or, when I thought that I was living authentically, I thought it meant that I was showing up to, as somebody who didn't like small talk at parties and, was somebody who would wear the purple when they felt like it. But actually, it's actually feeling your feelings. And no one really warns you about that, right? Really, wearing your favorite color is not the same as burying your soul. And when I really sat down to think about the show, I thought about why we don't feel our feelings. Well, for somebody who's a deep feeler like me and some of my most loved people, feeling every feeling can sound really exhausting or messy or terrifying. And honestly, probably all three for some of us. But the thing is, if we want to live a life that truly belongs to us, a life that's not borrowed or curated by social media or lived for somebody else, we have to start with feeling our emotions because that is where our authenticity begins. Because our emotions are really the data that tells us what's going on inside of ourselves. And it's the way to navigate our inner world. And so when we don't feel our feelings, we're not being truthful to ourselves. And so we have to really be able to get in there, start to understand what our bodies are telling us about our feelings, and really get in there into the messiness of it all. Um, I'm going to hit you with a hard truth here. You can't numb the bad feelings without dulling the good ones, right? You don't get to cherry pick your emotional experiences. Believe me, I've tried. It doesn't work, right? When you are somebody who feels very deeply, it also means that you're going to feel deeply on either end of the spectrum. I always kind of thought if I could somehow push away the tough stuff, the fear, the sadness, the anger, that I'll make room for the good vibes. But it really doesn't work that way. When you numb the hard stuff, you also block your ability to feel the joy, the gratitude, and the connection. And then living half alive isn't living authentically, right? It's just surviving. And that's not the life that we're here to live. We're not really here to just survive. And if you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching this show, then you're not somebody who wants to live a half life either. You're not somebody who just wants to survive, right? You are somebody who wants to thrive. You are somebody who wants to create the life that you want to be living. And that starts with being aware of your feelings, recognizing and then being able to sit with them. And listen, I'm going to be real honest, right? Like just last night, I was on the phone with my partner and I was crying and I was like, I'm so tired of feeling, I'm so tired of caring about this. And that can happen. For some of us who feel deeply, we get tired by the emotions. But guess what? I woke up today and it's not sunny out. It's actually pretty cloudy here, but it's a better day. Because the one thing that I always try to remember is as I've navigated these deep emotions growing up is that emotions are temporary. They are feelings. You let them come in and they will quickly move through you. So I just want to encourage you. We weren't meant to survive, right? We're here to feel, to thrive, to experience the full range of what it means to be human. And that means that we have to invite every emotion to the table, even the ones that overstay their welcome or show up unannounced. I always like to talk about grief in this way because grief is one of those really, can be really one of those difficult emotions to feel. And so when I was going through my divorce, and there's a lot of grief that comes from divorce, even if it's something that you choose, right? You have loved, you have lived, you've created a life, and then that life is changing. So, what I always used to joke about grief is that it would just sort of come in whenever it wanted to, it would sort of knock on the door. And what I learned is instead of saying, like, I'm fine, all is good, I had to start to just let that grief in whenever it came to the door to knock. I had to invite it in, welcome or not, because if I didn't, it was just going to keep knocking harder and harder. And sometimes grief would stay for a couple minutes. If I was looking at a picture of, my beautiful little family I had created, and sometimes it would stay for days. And I just had to let it do its thing because if I didn't, it was going to keep knocking and knocking until eventually it would blow my house down, like the big bad wolf, right? And so I've done it. I've done the avoidance game. I have said, um, I'm fine, usually even without thinking about it, right? It's like when you walk in the grocery store and you say, Hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? Right? We've all done it. We've sort of learned this cultural narrative of how to go back and forth with a big smile plastered on our face. And really inside, we're screaming like, I'm trying to keep it together. I'm not. Everything's falling apart. Right. And I think part of that is because we fear that if we're honest, we're going to fall apart or that people are going to look at us differently. But here's the thing that I learned about being honest, right? Saying I'm fine wasn't the strength that I thought I was dressing it up to. What it really is emotional denial dressed up as strength, right? I wasn't honoring my feelings. I was ignoring them. And when you do that, they just come back bigger and bigger. So my friends and I, even in our 40s, we like to play this game, right? Like in the summer in the pool. Like usually we're just laughing and talking and chilling. And we have these basketballs that we'll just sit on and float on, right? They're underwater. We laugh and we talk and we sit on these balls. And it's really all fun and games until the ball becomes unbalanced and it explodes to the surface, right? And then, of course, it is pretty funny because it's a basketball in the pool. So that is pretty silly. But here's the thing, like our emotions are just like those basketballs, right? When we ignore them, we try to hold the basketball underwater. The harder we push the basketball down, the deeper underwater we push it down, the more explosive it's going to be when it pops back up, right? So, yeah, all fun and games in the pool with your friends when the ball comes to the surface and you're laughing and it's silly. But the problem is when the ball comes up, the basketball comes up to the surface, when we're trying to push it down, we don't know where that's going to hit, what the water is going to explode on, if it's going to the basketball is going to hit you in the face or hit somebody else in the face, right? And so pushing the basketball down, or that's the metaphor, really we're talking about avoiding our feelings and pushing them down. Eventually they will explode, right? And that means a disconnection from the person it explodes on, right? Whereas when we share our feelings, when we notice them, that always, always leads to connection with other people when I'm honest about my emotions and the more vulnerable I am with myself, and I actually admit to being a human, my relationships with other people is always strengthened. So I just want to turn the focus to you for a minute. So when is the last time that you really let yourself feel deeply? No distractions, which means you weren't on your phone, social media, TV, playing those games, eating, doing anything besides just feeling, right? You didn't brush it off. You didn't allow your brain to tell you it wasn't a big deal, that there's no reason to feel this way, the other person didn't mean it, etc. Right? You didn't label it as too dramatic or too much. When is the last time you just sat with it, letting it be what it is? What scares you about your emotions? Is there a fear that they're going to be too big or too messy, or that if you open the floodgates, you won't be able to close them? Or maybe it's a fear of judgment. I'm guessing it's probably one of all of those because you're not alone. We've all had those fears. I've had those fears. But the truth is, your emotions aren't here to destroy you. They're really a guide to teach you. Your emotions show you what matters most to you. And when you give yourself permission to feel them fully, you start to unlock a level of authenticity that is impossible to fake. So we're going to leave this first part of the conversation. Authenticity isn't just about surface level stuff, right? It's not about what you wear, what you say, or even what you do. It's deeper. It starts with feeling your feelings, even when your feelings scare you. So in the next part of this, we're going to dig into what happens when we actually avoid those feelings. What does it cost us when we don't sit with it? It usually costs us more than we realize, and I have proof from my own life. But for now, I want you to sit with those questions. When was the last time you let yourself feel? And what's holding you back from doing it more? All right. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, and we are going to take a quick break. So stick with me because it's just the beginning of unraveling this beautiful, messy truth of living authentically. Trust me, it's worth every tear, laugh, and everything in between. We'll be back in a minute. All right, my loves, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, also known as Queen of the Pivot. And today we are talking about the connection between authenticity and feeling our feelings. I know feeling our feelings is not fun. It's not even something we love to talk about, but stick with me because I'm going to convince you why it's important. All right. So first, let's talk about avoidance, right? Like not the kinds where you dodge your ex at the grocery store. That's just survival. That's just something you have to do. I'm talking about emotional avoidance, the kind where you shove your feelings into a metaphorical closet, right? You slap on a smile, you tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. But here's the spoiler alert. Later doesn't come. You know what does though? Stress, burnout, a startling resemblance to that one aunt who always loses it at Thanksgiving, right? Talk about burnout, not taking the time to feel stress, frustration. So I have been there. I'm going to guess we all have been there. One time that really rings to the surface in my life when I'm thinking about this avoidance was at the tail end of my last stint as a school counselor. For years I was a school counselor. I loved doing it. And I was a school counselor all the way through COVID, and you've heard me talk about this before, but I want to talk about what happens when you don't take the time to feel your feelings. So at that time, I had just gone through COVID, meaning we had figured out how to do education with our students, and we were working as a team. These kids were back in school. Their mental health was a mess. Everybody's mental health was a mess, including my own. But I didn't take the time to deal with it. Like when you're a helper, a lot of times you're so focused on helping other people that you don't take the time to feel your own feelings. So, in classic very human form. I avoided my own feelings. My boss was very difficult to work with. She had very unfair ideas of what things needed to look like. Um, and then I'm also holding the stress of everyone around me. And so there were probably telltale signs looking back that I was stressed. If I had sat with it and taken the time to implement the self-care activities that I have now brought into my life, I would have noticed that I wasn't okay. But because I wasn't doing my daily meditation. I wasn't journaling. I wasn't taking the time to do my yoga practice, which is a lot of times when I feel my feelings and I can witness them and observe them. I wasn't taking the time to feel my feelings. And so what happened eventually is I was working with a group of students and actually two groups of students, and they were at each other's throats. They really just wanted to actually physically hurt each other. And this is a group of girls I had worked with for a couple years. And I was getting to the point where at one point, told them to like sit down and be quiet. And my co-counselor was in there with me and I raised my voice. And that's not something I typically did as a school counselor. As a mom, yeah, unfortunately, I'm working on it. But at school, that was unlike me. And so right then was kind of a notice that like maybe I wasn't all right? Because that was not typical behavior for me. And so I actually had a doctor's appointment scheduled for a couple of days later. And when I went to my doctor, I was kind of telling her everything that was happening and sort of taking the time to talk it through, which I hadn't done with anybody else. And she said, Laura, you are completely burnt out, right? Everything that you're talking about, right? Needing to sleep all the time, being stressed at home, right? On really short temper with your kids, not taking care of yourself, always on pins and needles at work, right? Like I used to, I'm not kidding when I say this, I used to, if I heard my principal walking down the hall, I would like dive into a room just to hide because I didn't want to hear what she was bringing to me. It was incredibly stressful because typically it was something that was going to knock me off my game, that wasn't important, and that just didn't work with what the environment that we were currently working in. And so she was like, it's going to get really bad. Your body's going to start to shut down. So I took her advice and I took a leave of absence. I ended up sleeping for a month, except for when my kids were home and I was taking care of them and being a mom. My body completely shut down. I got sick and I slept for a month straight, right? So let me ask the question, right? Was the fallout from suppressing the emotion worth the suppression, right? Was it worth not paying attention to my stress and anxiety and my feelings about the job? No, right? It's funny, but it's not haha funny. It's like a funny oh no, right? We think that avoiding our emotions is like pressing mute, but it's really more like pressing pause. And eventually, life hits play again. And often it's the most inconvenient time, like in the middle of a work presentation or during a casual fight over who left the milk out, right? Or if you're in my house, it's who ate the leftover dinner that I was trying to cook, that I was going to use for dinner, right? So the question really then becomes, did avoiding that feeling give me the relief that I thought it was going to give me? Did avoiding the stress give me the relief? Maybe in the moment, right? Because I wasn't dealing with it. Because listen, let's be honest, denial is a hell of a drug, right? But in the long term, avoidance is very costly. And in the end, when I avoided my feelings, it ended up putting me into a massive burnout that I then had to deal with, right? It was like that basketball in the pool. I kept shoving the basketball deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually it just came out of the water and exploded and then deflated because I couldn't get out of bed, right? So let's get nerdy for a moment. So did you know that avoiding emotions isn't just a mental game, right? It's physical. So when you suppress your feelings, your body reacts higher stress hormones, muscle tension, weakened immune functions. Any of you who've ever gotten a massage from a massage therapist and they go to your shoulders and they're like, whoa, what's going on in your life, right? You know that muscle tension is likely from stress, right? Your emotions are saying to you, okay, you're not going to listen? Cool. We're going to talk to your body instead, right? Your body keeps receipts of every emotion that you shove into the closet, and it's going to bring them up maybe when you're stuck in traffic or when you're trying to have a relaxing vacation, right? Because apparently that's how biology works. You know, it's really common for graduate students who have gone through a really stressful semester to end their semester and then get sick immediately afterwards, right? Because that stress has gone to their body. So here's the kicker. When we ignore emotions, you're not just avoiding the bad ones, you're disconnecting from the good ones too, right? Joy, excitement, love, they all get watered down when you try to numb yourself. And, I think about this in my own life, right? When I'm stressed, I tend to hibernate, right? I tend to go on my phone and play a stupid game that really means nothing, but it allows me to like push my emotions away for a minute. And guess what? When I'm pushing away those emotions, the negative ones, it's also taking my mindfulness away from my loved ones. Because in those moments, I could have dealt with my emotions and then be hanging out with my kids. But instead, I'm still trying to push away my emotions by playing this game on my phone, right? It might seem easier in the moment, but the long-term cost is a life that really feels muted or disconnected, right? So here's the thing. There are some major myths about emotions, right? If I let myself feel this, I'll fall apart. I get it, because feelings can be scary. Falling apart is sometimes the first step to putting yourself back together authentically, right? It's like taking the Lego bin and dumping it out. It's a mess, but once you sort of sort through it, you can build something and you feel lighter, right? Feelings aren't meant to destroy you. They're meant to guide you. They're signals, right? They might feel like storms, but they're just signals. If you lean into them instead of running away, you might find clarity on the other side, most likely, right? Another myth. I don't have time for feelings. I have a to-do list, the productivity trap, right? That's what I got to in my job. I don't have time to feel my stress. I just have to get this done, this. But let me ask you this. How much time do you lose procrastinating because you're overwhelmed by emotions that you're not dealing with, right? Or spiraling after a small setback because it's triggered something else that's unresolved, right? Taking the time to feel isn't a detour, it's the fastest route to moving forward. Feelings don't go away because you ignore them. They just find sneakier ways to show up. So here's where we land. Avoiding emotions feels safe in the short term, but it's really like a ticking time bomb. The cost is disconnection from yourself, from others, and from the life you actually want to be living. But here's the good news. You don't have to stay stuck, right? We can start small. We can acknowledge one feeling today, name it, sit with it, see what it has to say, right? In the next part, we're going to talk about what it looks like to face those feelings head on and how to move through them instead of around them or ignoring them. But for now, I'm going to leave you with this. Your feelings aren't your enemy, they're your compass. If you let them, they'll lead you to a life that feels raw, real, and undeniably yours. So stick with me. When we get back, we're going to talk about feeling those feelings and what that actually means. Stay tuned, and we will be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach with Laura Nichols, also known as Queen of the Pivot. And we're talking about what it looks like to show up authentically with starting by feeling our feelings, right? And the quote that we're working with is, do you want to live an authentic life? Start with feeling every feeling. And that is from the book Notes from Your Coach that I originally put out last year. And here is the fun part. When this comes out, 2 weeks later is the newest edition of Notes from Your Coach. And I changed it up a little bit because I took 90 of the quotes of 150. And then I added commentary and reflection questions. And so it's really meant to be a 90-day journey to really get you started and to ignite your motivation to move your life. And it's coming out January 1st on Amazon. And it's the perfect time for those of us who love to start the new year fresh and going and geared up to make a change in our life. And so I'm really excited for the new edition to come out. So check it out. This quote is in there amongst 89 others. And if you use it as sort of a quote of the day, you'll get through it in 90 days. It also comes with a free workbook as well to answer all the questions that are in the book. So check it out. And I'd love to get some feedback from y'all. So we are deep diving into feelings, right? We're talking about what it means to actually feel the feelings. And I know for some of us that sounds terrifying because some of us are big feelers, right? Some of us struggle with emotional dysregulation. We're learning what it means to not allow our emotions to consume us. We are learning what it means to feel them and not let them dictate our lives. And so I get it. I get the draw to avoiding your emotions. But the thing is, avoiding them doesn't make them disappear, right? It just turns them into uninvited house guests who steal your space and leave dirty dishes in the sink, right? They're there no matter what. So you either invite them in or don't invite them in, but they're going to come in the house anyway, right? And so when we use them as data and we invite them in and we ask them what they need, right? Then we get a lot more information from it. So if you're somebody who likes to deal with emotions by shoving them in the mental storage unit labeled, I'll deal with it later, this is for you, right? The spoiler alert is that later always shows up. And it's usually, you don't get to choose it, right? It's usually going to show up when you're already having a bad day. So the first part, the first idea of feeling your feelings, and this is where the world that we have created, the life that we have created naturally and culturally, keeps us really, really busy. And it keeps us really from feeling them, right? You can't feel your feelings if you're too busy running around from them, right? So the first thing that you have to do is to pause and notice them, right? It sounds super simple, but it's really not that simple. Most of us are really on emotional autopilot, right? We're too busy to stop, we're too distracted to check in, and honestly, sometimes too stubborn to admit when something's off. And so this is where you cultivate some sort of mindfulness practice, right? This is why you hear me talk about yoga all the time and meditation all the time, right? Yes, I'm woo woo, but that's not why I talk about it because there's major science to back up the idea that learning to observe your feelings, right, gets you into better emotional regulation and allows you to use your feelings as data that you can then use to change your actions rather than getting all caught up in them and letting your emotions sort of dictate the life you want. So I want you to think about it like checking the weather app, right? You're not going to walk outside and get drenched because you guessed wrong, right? Like you're going to check the app. Is it sunny? Is it stormy? Are we on full on hurricane mode, right? It's better to look at the weather app to know what you're going to get when you walk outside than to just kind of blindly hope for the best, right? Listen, and I don't say this lightly because I'm not somebody who checks the weather all the time. Even though I come from farm stock and my grandmother would like roll over in her grave if she heard me saying this, because the first question she always asked when I talked to her on the phone was, "How's the weather where you live?" Right? Because she was Kansas farmland and the weather was the first thing we always talked about as far as rain and crops go. So I'm not someone who's really good at checking the weather, but I have become somebody who's good at checking in with my emotions, right? And that is because when I go through a period of life when things get busy and I don't have my practices, that's when things get really messy. And listen, I don't mind messiness. Life is messy. We're human. But sometimes it doesn't have to be as messy as we allow it to be, right? So when we're talking about breaking the cycle of avoidance, what does it look like, right? Stop, take a breath, and just notice what's bubbling up, right? We do this without judgment. There's no idea that we have to fix this in the moment. We're just observing. It might feel a little awkward when you first start, right? Because if you're not somebody who's ever sat and observed your feelings, you might feel a little silly doing it. But this is where the magic starts, right? Once you've noticed what's bubbling up for you, and sometimes, like this is honestly one of the first things I do with my clients as a certified life coach. One of the first things we typically do is spend a week noticing our feelings, right? Because what a lot of people have realized is they've become really disconnected from themselves and they don't know what their feelings are showing them. So typically we spend an entire week on this, whether they're my teen clients or my adults, right? And no matter what pivot they're coming to me for, this is always, I would say 95% of the time where we start. Self-directed by them, right? Because we've gotten out of practice of feeling our feelings, right? And I do it too. Even though this is my profession, there are times in my life where I forget to sit and notice what my feelings are. And when I start to bubble up, or respond to my kids in a way that is not really appropriate for what has happened, then I know, okay, I might have missed something. I haven't really been sitting with myself. So the first is just sitting with it, right? Notice what's coming up, be curious and not judgmental. All right. So now this is the second step. You've paused, you've noticed, and now it's time to name it, right? Why? Because if you can name it, you can tame it. Okay, that was silly, but for real, science backs this up, right? Naming your emotion reduces the intensity of them, right? It's like putting a leash on a rowdy dog, right? Once you're able to say, this is what is happening, this is how I feel, right? And being specific, it's really helpful. For instance, right? A lot of times we like to say things like, I'm mad or I'm angry. But once you realize that anger is really just sort of hurt dressed up as like a knight in shining armor trying to protect your little vulnerable self, it's a game changer, right? So instead of saying I'm mad, you might say I'm hurt because I'm feeling ignored, right? Do you see the difference? One's a vague explosion, like, blah, I'm so angry. And one's a clear signal, right? It's like upgrading from dial-up, remember, to high speed Wi-Fi, right? When it comes to emotional processing, you get to it a lot quicker. So being able to say, instead of just vaguely saying I'm mad, but going to say, I'm actually hurt because, my loved one's not spending time with me that I wanted, that's a major game changer, right? That's where vulnerability happens. And that's where authenticity then comes. If you're not sure what you're feeling, you can Google it. I use a feeling wheel with my clients all the time. And so that's the thing. Check out the emotion wheel, the feeling wheel. You're welcome. That is also a game changer. All right, so here's where it gets a little tricky. You've named it. Now you actually have to sit with it. I know it sounds awful, but here's the thing. Feelings are temporary, right? They're not problems to fix. They're just experiences. They come in, they do their thing, then they leave. They're like a house guest. Some of them are lovely and bring wine, which is great. Others overstay their welcome, but none of them are permanent. They all come and go in and out of our lives, right? And this is where a lot of people panic, right? They think if I let myself feel this, I'm going to fall apart. Well, let me tell you, you're not made of glass. You're not going to shatter. You are way stronger than you think. I'm called the queen of the pivot because I have gone through some major changes in my life, ones that have brought a ton of feelings and emotions. Divorce, coming out, changing my career, burnout, moving to another city, unraveling religion, right? There's a lot that I have dealt with, and I'm still here. And I'm even stronger than I ever realized. And every time I go through, still get surprised. Wow, okay, I'm way more resilient than I think. Emotions are just like waves. They build, they peak, and then they pass. The more you resist them, the more you feel like you're drowning. But if you lean into them, if you let yourself feel the sadness, the anger, the fear, it's going to move through you. You'll come out the other side lighter, clearer, and a little more brave, right? It's almost like allowing them in to do their work is what releases them. Otherwise, you're just fighting against them being there and they just get stuck, right? After that, we have to release them and reflect. You don't just sit in the discomfort, right? You let it move through you. And there's ways to do this, right? Crying, totally valid. I'm a crier, right? It's like an emotional detox. I love crying. I mean, I don't love it in the moment, but it's great afterwards. Journaling, it's basically a brain dump for your soul. We do a lot of brain dumps and journaling with my clients. Talk to a friend, it's free therapy with snacks. Screaming into a pillow, that works. Don't knock it till you try it, right? The goal isn't here to get rid of your emotions, but really it's to process them so they don't take up permanent residence. Reflect on what came up. Ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Because emotions are messengers. They're not trying to punish you, they're here to teach you. So for me, I'm a verbal processor. I do a lot better when I can talk about things. And there are times when I don't understand what emotion is telling me until I verbally process it, right? And so once I do that and I have allowed it to move through, and then I can process what it is and I can sit with it, it tells me a lot of information. And then it tells me where I need to go or what changes I need to make. So here you have it. Pause and notice it, name it, sit with it, release it. It's not rocket science, but it does take a little bit of bravery. Honestly, it's that work that leads to life that's real and messy and alive. When you stop running from your emotions, you start running towards yourself, and that is where authenticity lives. Every feeling isn't easy, but it's worth it. So, the next time that you're tempted to shove your feelings into the metaphorical closet, remember, these feelings are not your enemies. They're just visitors passing through, asking you to pay attention to them. So, let them in, feel it all, and then see what lies on the other side. So we're going to wrap up this segment. You're listening to Notes from Your Coach. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to get into the gifts of feeling the feelings. What does it actually do to feel it, and where's the gold at the ends? And that's the game changer. We'll be right back. All right, we are back on Notes from Your Coach, and we are looking at the reframe. How is feeling the feeling beneficial? And the reason that I start with this with my clients is we start with looking at feelings in the first place, is because it's really important to get a sense of where you're at, where you are, so that you know where to move to. And in coaching, coaching is all about going from one spot to the next, from A to B, and then how we get there. And typically, a lot of people being disconnected from their feelings is the first piece of this, looking at where they are, paying attention to what their body's telling them. A lot of times people have reached out to me because they're not feeling good, but they can't really put a sense of why they're not feeling good and what that and like where they want to go. And so that is a lot of where we spend our time. But here's sort of the grand finale of the podcast today. We're going to deep dive into feelings. You might be thinking, I get it, feeling my feelings is important. But what is the point of all of this emotional heavy lifting? Why do I spend so much time teaching my clients to feel, to let it come in, to name it, to process it, right? Um, feelings are kind of like those weirdly wrapped presents that you're hesitant to open, right? Like you're like, what is in this weird thing? Like, what is this? It's under the tree. It could be socks or it could be curtains. It feels kind of soft. You don't know, right? But the thing is, if you don't open it, your life doesn't change. It could be a life-changing gift. You have no idea what's inside. Also, side note, sometimes acknowledging the feeling is the ultimate plot twist, right? Like, I kind of thought that if I avoided my emotions, life would be easier. But really, feeling them, letting them move through my body and processing them, that's kind of the real cheat code, right? Because once you acknowledge what you're telling yourself through your feelings, you're able to move, right? Um, okay, I'm going to give you a little example of this in my life. And it's actually not a little example, it's kind of a big one. So, gosh, what are we talking like 6 years ago now? I was coming to terms with being gay, and I had been in a marriage, married to a man, a great dude, raising kids, and sort of was having this big realization about myself. At this point in the story, I've already realized that I'm actually gay, right? But I wasn't dealing with the feelings that came from that. Meaning, I had these kids. I was sort of bargaining with myself. Like, what if I just wait? What if I wait to come out until they're out of college? Like, I don't want to be the person that disrupts everybody's life. Like, I'm going to push down all of my feelings, like that basketball that I was talking about before, and put everybody else's feelings above mine, right? Because as the mom, as the wife, like in my mind, and this is what was taught on various levels, like it's my responsibility to hold everybody else's emotions, right, above me. And so I'm going along and I'm kind of trying to bargain through that. And one day it just got to a point where my brain was giving me some really ugly thoughts, right? life-ending thoughts. And that really scared me because I was a mental health practitioner. And so I drove to a parking lot and I just cried. And I thought, okay, clearly there's some stuff here that I'm refusing to acknowledge. I'm avoiding these feelings, I'm avoiding these emotions. I have to look at them. And I did a deep dive. I went deep into my feelings and had to sit with what it would look like if I didn't take the time to come out and say, this is who I am. I'm a queer woman. This is what it means. Ultimately, I needed to acknowledge these feelings so that not only could I move on, but everybody else in my life could too, right? If I had just continued to try to distract myself with like a snack, lots of snacks or lots of time playing video games, like I honestly don't know if I would be here, right? I couldn't run anymore. I had to let myself feel it all. The anger, the sadness, the fear. I had to open the floodgates. You know what? 6 years later, here we are. I didn't fall apart, right? I walked through the emotional storm and found something that I didn't expect, which was clarity. And for the first time, I was able to see who I was and what I wanted. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to look at these emotions and sit with them and process them. But it was so worth it because let me tell you, the things that I have done since coming out, the bravery that I built, the courage that I now stand on because of that experience, um, made it so worth it. It, I feel like I probably would never have started my business, written a book, started a podcast, right? When you look at your feelings, allow yourself to feel them and have the courage to face them and then make decisions based on them. That is all like going to the gym and building resiliency muscles. It allows you to be stronger for the next thing that comes. It allows you to get through the next storm quicker because you've already started to develop those muscles. The only way out really is through. But the thing is, on the other side, you find pieces of yourself that you didn't necessarily know were missing. So let's talk about the perks of feeling all the feelings. There are perks, I promise. They're not always shiny and immediate, but they are powerful. So here's what happens when you stop running from your emotions and start leaning in. One, resilience. When you feel the full spectrum of emotions, joy, grief, anger, hope, you learn how to handle life's highs and lows. You're building that emotional resiliency muscle that I was talking about before. You don't just survive the storm, you really get better at navigating it the next time it comes up, right? Right? Sometimes it's painful to lift weights, but in the end, you're stronger for it. Okay. The next thing that comes out of feeling your feelings is connection, right? When you're in tune with your emotions, you show up more fully in your relationships. You're not just pretending to be fine while you're secretly falling apart. You're honest, you're vulnerable, and real. And that honesty invites deeper connection with others, right? Honesty begets honesty. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. When I say, I'm not okay, it allows for other people to say, oh my gosh, I'm not okay either. Are we allowed to admit that? And I'm like, yeah, we're allowed to admit that because being a human can be messy, right? We don't bond over perfection, right? We bond over the messy human experience. And so, if you want deeper connections, one beautiful gift of feeling your feelings is that you're going to get that, right? You're going to be able to show up and connect with other people. Because guess what? The third gift is authenticity. You can't run from the parts of yourself and still show up authentically, right? Feeling your feelings means accepting all of you, not just those social media worthy parts, right? That kind of self acceptance is magnetic, right? In two ways. One, it pushes people away who are not meant for you, right? It's like turning the magnets the other way, it pushes them. But two, it brings your people to you. When you show up authentically by saying, here I am, these are my feelings, this is how I'm showing up, other people who also want to live authentically are going to be drawn to that. And so you push away people who are not your people and you pull to you people that are. And That's such a beautiful way to live a life, to be connected to people authentically. Another gift that comes from feeling your feelings is freedom. When you stop being afraid of your emotions, they really lose their power over you, right? Instead of dreading them, you get to be curious about them. And that curiosity, that's where the magic happens. You start to live boldly because you know that you can handle anything that life throws your way, right? How much freedom can come when we stop being afraid of these big bad feelings and realize that they're just data, right? And I get it for those of us, again, who are big feelers, they can feel big, but you don't have to be afraid of them. You can invite them in, allow them to come in, be that house guest, do what they need to do, take the data that they've taught you and move on, right? It's not about being fearless, but it's about being courageous and still showing up. You've heard me say it before, I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Courage is just feeling the fear and doing it anyway. You're allowed to be afraid of the emotions, but you still get to choose to feel them and act from them. So, how do we start embracing emotions without totally freaking out, right? So, with my clients, I always say start small, right? The next time you feel something coming up, whether it's joy, sadness, or rage, just pause. Take a deep breath all the way into your belly. And instead of running from it, ask yourself this question: what is this emotion here to teach me, right? So, you notice it, you name it, you let it move through you, and you say, what are you here to teach me, right? Sometimes the answer will be profound. Sometimes it's just you're hangry. Go eat something. Guess what? Both are valid, right? They're both information. It doesn't have to be that deep. Sometimes you just need to take care of a basic need. Authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And being real starts with feeling everything: beautiful, the messy, the uncomfortable. So give yourself permission to feel because that's where the good stuff lives: the growth, the clarity, the connection, the freedom. I want to leave you with this. Life is too short to live half alive. Feeling everything might sound scary, but it's also the key to living fully, deeply, authentically. And you are worth that kind of life. Thank you so much for sharing space with me today. I want you to go out and feel everything. As you step back into your human journey, remember this week's unfiltered motivation from this episode of Notes from Your Coach. You want an authentic life? Start with feeling every feeling. You've got this. And in case you need a reminder, you're a badass. Keep rocking it. Until next time, stay true, stay empowered, stay resilient, and remember the power of the pivot. If you'd like to contact me, you can go to my website, Notes from Your Coach. All my info is on the contact page. You can also sign up for my monthly newsletter there. You can always shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. If you're enjoying this podcast, please rate it so that other people get a chance to hear it. And come back and join me every first and third Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 p.m. Pacific time. Have a great week, and I'll see you back here next time.
Always remember that you are your greatest asset. For more Notes from Your Coach with me, Queen of the Pivot, tune in every first and third Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Each episode is chock full of unfiltered motivation to ignite your life and focuses on the tiny nugget of potent truth to empower you to take action and understand the power of the pivot. Share this show and share your journey using hashtag Notes from Your Coach. Subscribe and leave a review by visiting notesfromyourcoach.com.